You dominate conversations, thinking you're demonstrating expertise, but people tune out halfway through your sentences. You interrupt others with your brilliant insights, yet somehow your relationships feel shallow and your influence remains limited, while quieter colleagues seem to effortlessly build stronger connections and advance faster. I am Dale Carnegie, and I spent decades studying human nature, discovering that the most magnetic people aren't the best talkers, they're the best listeners. Through my research with thousands of individuals, I learned that listening isn't just polite behavior. It's the secret weapon of influence, the foundation of genuine connection, and the fastest path to becoming genuinely indispensable. What I discovered about the power of listening will transform every relationship in your life. From boardroom negotiations to intimate conversations, the listening principles I'll share aren't just communication techniques. They're the keys to making people feel truly seen, heard, and valued in a world where everyone is fighting to be heard, but few know how to truly listen. But first, like this video, subscribe for more timeless wisdom on human connection, and comment below where you're watching from. I want to know which corner of the world is ready to master the art of listening. I was 17 and absolutely certain I knew everything worth knowing. On our Missouri farm, I had opinions about crop rotation, opinions about livestock, opinions about weather patterns, and I shared every single one of them with anyone within earshot. I believed that speaking first, speaking loudest, and speaking most made me the smartest person in any room. My father kept his old ledger book on the kitchen table, worn, leather-bound record of every farm transaction, every seed purchase, every livestock sale. While I pontificated about agricultural theory, he would sit quietly, making careful entries in that book, his weathered hands moving deliberately across the pages. I thought his silence meant he wasn't listening. I was wrong. One evening, after I had spent 20 minutes explaining why we should plant our corn earlier than usual, my father closed his ledger and looked at me with those patient eyes that had seen 40 harvests come and go. "Son," he said quietly, "you've been talking about planting for the better part of an hour. Have you asked me why I plant when I do?" I hadn't. In all my verbose wisdom sharing, I had never once asked him a question. I had been so busy demonstrating my knowledge that I never thought to tap into his. "Tell me," I said, finally. For the next hour, my father shared insights I never would have discovered through my own talking. He explained how soil temperature affected germination rates, how late frost patterns had shifted over the decades, how neighboring farmers' planting schedules created opportunities for better pricing. Every piece of wisdom came from years of quiet observation, careful listening to other farmers, and patient attention to nature's subtle signals. That night, I opened his ledger book. The margins were filled with notes, not just numbers, but observations. Johnson mentioned soil to wet on North 40. Sarah Thompson's early corn hit by frostweight 2 more weeks. Old Peterson says his father always watched the oak leaves plant when they're the size of squirrel ears. I realized my father had been listening to everyone and everything while I had been talking to anyone who would pretend to listen. His quiet attention had made him the most knowledgeable farmer in our county, while my constant chatter had taught me nothing except the sound of my own voice. The next morning, I made a decision that would change my life. Instead of starting the day with my usual stream of commentary, I asked my father a simple question: what should I pay attention to today? His face lit up in a way I had never seen before. For the first time, his son wasn't trying to impress him with premature wisdom, was asking to learn from his experience. That summer, I discovered that listening wasn't passive, it was the most active thing I could do. Every conversation became a treasure hunt for insights I would have missed while talking. Every person I met had knowledge I needed, stories that could teach me, perspectives that could broaden my understanding. My father's ledger book taught me that wisdom isn't found in the volume of words you speak, but in the quality of attention you give to the words others share. The loudest voice in the room is rarely the wisest one. True intelligence reveals itself not in brilliant monologues, but in thoughtful questions and patient listening. That 17-year-old boy who thought talking was power learned that listening is influence, silence is strength, and questions are more valuable than answers. Asterisk, asterisk. The lesson from my father's ledger book haunted me for months. I had spent years believing that my value came from what I could contribute to conversations, but I began to suspect I had it backwards. Maybe my value came from what I could help others contribute. So I designed what I privately called the Great Listening Experiment. For 1 week, I would force myself to talk exactly half as much as usual. Instead of jumping into conversations with my opinions, I would ask questions. Instead of waiting for my turn to speak, I would focus entirely on understanding what others were saying. I started with my speech class at Warrensburg State Teachers College. Every fiber of my being wanted to impress my classmates with clever observations about rhetoric and presentation techniques. Instead, I bit my tongue and asked them what they thought about the day's lesson. The results shocked me. My classmate, Robert, whom I had dismissed as quiet and unremarkable, revealed that he had been studying every successful speaker in our town, analyzing their techniques, and developing theories about what made some people naturally compelling. In all my months of trying to impress Robert with my own speaking insights, I had never discovered that he was conducting the same research I was, but with more depth and originality. Margaret, who rarely spoke in class, told me about her strategy for overcoming stage fright by imagining she was teaching her younger siblings. Her technique was so simple and effective that I adopted it immediately and began sharing it with others who struggled with nervousness. By the 3rd day of my experiment, something extraordinary happened. People began seeking me out, not because I had become more interesting, but because I had become more interested. They felt heard, understood, appreciated for their thoughts rather than overwhelmed by mine. The breakthrough came on Thursday evening. I was talking with Professor Morrison about my career prospects, and instead of launching into my usual speech about my ambitions and qualifications, I asked him what he had learned about success from watching his former students. For 4 minutes, Professor Morrison shared insights that no classroom lecture had ever contained. He told me about students who had failed academically but succeeded professionally because they understood people. He described the most successful graduate he knew, a woman who had built a thriving business simply by listening to what her community needed and providing it. Then he said something that changed my life. Dale, you're the first student who has ever asked me that question. Most young people are so eager to tell me their plans that they never ask what I've learned from watching other plans succeed or fail. That night, I wrote in my notebook, people are desperate to share what they know, what they've experienced, what they've learned. They're not desperate for another person to tell them what to think. The experiment had revealed a profound truth. Everyone I met was carrying valuable knowledge, hard-won insights, and fascinating perspectives. But most people never got to share them because others were too busy talking to ask. I decided the experiment would never end. My grandfather's pocket watch sits on my desk as I write this. Its steady tick, a reminder of the most valuable lesson he ever taught me. Time is the only gift you can never get back, which makes it the most precious thing you can give another person. I discovered the magnetic power of undivided attention during my early days teaching public speaking classes in New York. I was rushing between students, trying to give everyone feedback when I noticed something that stopped me cold. The students who improved most dramatically weren't necessarily the most talented. They were the ones who felt they had my complete attention when we spoke. Sarah Henderson was struggling with her presentations. She would stumble over words, lose her train of thought, and end every sentence like it was a question. Most instructors would have given her quick tips and moved on. Instead, I did something different. I pulled out my grandfather's pocket watch, set it on the table between us, and said, "Sarah, for the next 10 minutes, this time belongs entirely to you. Tell me what you're thinking about when you get in front of the group." What happened next taught me everything about the power of focused attention. Sarah's entire posture changed. Her shoulders relaxed. Her voice became steadier. For 10 uninterrupted minutes, she had the complete attention of another human being who cared about her. Success. She told me about her fear of being judged, her worry that people would think she was stupid, her desperate desire to make her immigrant father proud. But here's what was remarkable. As she talked, I began to see her differently. This wasn't a struggling student who needed fixing. This was a thoughtful young woman with important ideas who had been paralyzed by fear. My complete attention had revealed her true self, not just her surface problem. When Sarah gave her next presentation, she was transformed, not because I had given her brilliant advice, but because someone had truly seen her, understood her fears, and believed in her potential. I began experimenting with this spotlight effect in every interaction. When someone spoke to me, I would imagine a beam of light connecting my attention directly to them. No glancing around the room, no thinking about my response while they talked, no mental multitasking, just pure, focused attention on this person, in this moment, sharing this part of themselves with me. The results were extraordinary. Business associates began confiding in me about opportunities they had never mentioned to others. Students started asking me to be their mentor. Friends sought my advice on their most important decisions. None of this happened because I became smarter or more insightful. It happened because I learned to give people something rarer than wisdom: my complete, undivided presence. In our modern world, true attention has become almost extinct. Everyone is looking at screens, thinking about their next appointment, or planning their response while pretending to listen. The person who gives genuine, focused attention stands out like a lighthouse in a storm. I learned that attention is not just about hearing words, it's about seeing the person behind the words. It's about creating a sacred space where someone feels completely heard, understood, and valued. When you give someone your undivided attention, you're telling them that in this moment, they are the most important person in the world to you. That gift transforms not just the conversation, but the relationship itself. During my research for how to win friends and influence people, I interviewed hundreds of successful people, filling notebook after notebook with their insights. But I discovered something troubling. Most people asking questions weren't really interested in the answers. They were just waiting for their turn to share their own story. I call this conversational hijacking, and I was guilty of it myself until I learned the transformative power of the genuine. Follow-up question: that the breakthrough came during an interview with a successful businessman named Thomas Mitchell. I had asked him about his rise from clerk to company president, and he gave me a standard response about hard work and determination. The old Dale Carnegie would have nodded politely and moved to the next question, but something in his voice suggested there was more to the story. Instead of moving on, I leaned forward and said, "Thomas, when you say hard work, what did that actually look like day to day?" His entire demeanor changed. He sat back, smiled, and began telling me about sleeping in his office during the busy season, about learning bookkeeping by candlelight after 16-hour workdays, about the night he discovered a financial error that would have bankrupted the company. The follow-up question had unlocked the real story, the human story behind the polished response. That moment taught me the 3 types of questions that deepen every conversation. The clarification question: what do you mean when you say? This shows you're paying attention to their specific words and want to understand their precise meaning. Most people use the same words to mean different things, and clarifying prevents misunderstanding while showing genuine interest. The experience question. What was that like for you? This moves the conversation from facts to feelings, from events to experiences. It invites the speaker to share not just what happened, but how it affected them personally. The wisdom question. What did you learn from that? This shows you value their insights and experiences as sources of wisdom. It transforms them from someone telling a story to someone sharing valuable knowledge. But the most powerful tool in my questioning arsenal became the simple phrase, "Tell me more about that." These 5 words work magic in any conversation. They show genuine curiosity without directing the response. They give the speaker permission to go deeper into whatever aspect of their story matters most to them. They demonstrate that you find their thoughts and experiences valuable enough to want more detail. I watched this phrase transform business negotiations, personal relationships, and casual conversations. When someone mentions they're working on a challenging project and you say, "Tell me more about that," they light up because someone actually wants to hear about their work. When they mention a family trip and you ask for more details, you're showing that their life experiences matter to you. The key is patience. Most people ask a question and then immediately jump to their own related story when the person finishes their first response. But the real gold lies in the follow-up, in showing that their initial answer was interesting enough to warrant deeper exploration. I learned that conversations are like archaeological digs. The surface level is where most people stop, but the treasures, the real insights, the meaningful connections, the valuable information lie deeper. Follow-up questions are your excavation tools. When you master the art of the follow-up question, you stop being someone who asks questions and become someone who shows genuine interest in the answers. That distinction changes everything. Asterisk, asterisk. The most important conversation of my personal life taught me that listening isn't just about hearing words. It's about understanding the emotions, fears, and hopes that live in the spaces between those words. I was courting my future wife, Lolita, and she had just told me about her day teaching school. On the surface, everything sounded fine. She described her lessons, mentioned a few challenging students, and talked about her plans for the next week. But something in her voice, a slight tremor, a barely perceptible pause before certain words, told me there was more to the story. The old Dale Carnegie would have accepted her words at face value and moved the conversation to my own day. But I had learned to listen not just to what people say, but to how they say it. I had learned to pay attention to the music behind the words. "Lolita," I said gently, "when you talk about those challenging students, I hear something in your voice. What's really going on?" She was quiet for a long moment. Then, with tears forming in her eyes, she told me what she hadn't said directly. She was questioning whether she was cut out for teaching. One particularly difficult student had told her she was the worst teacher he'd ever had, and those words had shaken her confidence to its core. That conversation changed our relationship forever, not because of what she said, but because I had learned to hear what she didn't say. I realized that most human communication happens beneath the surface. People tell us they're fine when they're struggling. They say a project is going well when they're terrified of failure. They mention they're busy when they really mean they're overwhelmed and need help. Learning to read between the words requires listening with your whole being, not just your ears. It means paying attention to the pace of speech. When someone slows down, they're often reaching for difficult truths. When they speed up, they might be nervous or trying to get past something uncomfortable. The energy level a drop in enthusiasm mid-sentence often signals doubt or concern they haven't expressed directly. The words they choose, I suppose, is different from I believe. I guess I should carries different weight than I want to. The pauses, the spaces where people gather courage to say something difficult or decide against sharing something important. But most importantly, I learned to listen for emotions disguised as facts. When someone says the quarterly report shows we're behind target, they might really be saying, I'm worried about my job security. When they mention traffic was terrible this morning, they could be expressing frustration with feeling out of control in their life. This deeper level of listening transformed every relationship in my life. Business associates began trusting me with their real concerns, not just their official positions. Friends started coming to me when they needed to work through difficult decisions. Family members felt safe sharing their genuine feelings, rather than socially acceptable responses. The key is creating space for the unspoken truth to emerge. Sometimes this means comfortable silence after someone finishes speaking, giving them permission to add what they really wanted to say. Sometimes it means reflecting back what you heard in their tone. It sounds like this situation is really weighing on you. I learned that people rarely say exactly what they mean on the first try. They test the waters with safer versions of their truth, waiting to see if you're really listening, if you really care, if you can be trusted with what they're actually thinking and feeling. When you become someone who listens between the words, you become someone people trust with their real selves. Asterisk, asterisk, I had a disease, and I didn't even know I was sick until the cure almost cost me the most important business relationship of my career. The interruption disease is epidemic in our society, and I was a chronic sufferer. I thought interrupting showed enthusiasm, quick thinking, and intellectual engagement. I believed that jumping in with my ideas demonstrated how actively I was listening and how much I had to contribute. I was completely wrong. The wake-up call came during a crucial meeting with J.C. Penney himself. I had been invited to discuss bringing my public speaking courses to his employees, a contract that could transform my struggling business. Mr. Penney was explaining his vision for employee development when, in my eagerness to show I understood, I interrupted him mid-sentence with what I thought was a brilliant insight. His reaction was subtle but devastating. He paused, gave me a look that lasted exactly 3 seconds, and then simply said, as I was saying, ... and continued his thought. But the energy in the room had shifted. The warmth in his voice had cooled. I had just shown one of America's most successful businessmen that I valued my own thoughts more than his words. That meeting taught me that interrupting isn't enthusiasm, it's aggression. It's not engagement, it's dominance. Every time I cut someone off mid-sentence, I was essentially saying, what I'm thinking is more important than what you're saying. I developed what I called the 3-second rule. Whenever someone finished speaking, I would count silently, 1, 2, 3, double quotes, before I responded. This tiny pause transformed my conversations in ways I never expected. First, it ensured that people had actually finished their thoughts. I discovered that many people pause mid-sentence to gather their thoughts, and what I had been interpreting as finished was actually just a breath before their most important point. Second, it gave me time to truly process what they had said instead of just planning my response. I realized I had been listening with my mouth instead of my mind, constantly preparing my next words instead of absorbing their current ones. Third, it showed people that their thoughts were valuable enough to deserve careful consideration. That 3-second pause communicated respect in a way that words never could. The psychological impact of being interrupted is profound and lasting. When you cut someone off, you don't just stop their words, you diminish their sense of worth. You communicate that their thoughts don't matter enough to deserve completion. You create a relationship dynamic where they become hesitant to share anything important, because they never know when you'll hijack the conversation. I began studying the interruption patterns of successful people and discovered something remarkable. The most influential individuals were also the most patient listeners. They understood that interrupting was a sign of weakness, not strength. It showed that you couldn't control your own impulses enough to let someone finish a complete thought. The 3-second rule became my salvation. It prevented countless interruptions, but more importantly, it often revealed that the person had more to say, better insights, deeper thoughts, more complete ideas than what they had initially shared. Some of my most valuable business insights came from what people said after I thought they were finished speaking. Some of my deepest friendships were built on conversations that flourished because I learned to create space for people to fully express themselves. Interrupting is the fastest way to make someone feel unheard, unimportant, and undervalued. Patience, on the other hand, is the foundation of every meaningful connection. The most powerful leader I ever studied wasn't powerful because of his ability to command. He was powerful because of his ability to listen. This revelation changed everything I thought I knew about leadership and authority. I was consulting for a struggling manufacturing company whose productivity had plummeted and whose workers were openly discussing unionization. The owner, frustrated and desperate, had brought me in to teach his managers how to get through to their employees. He expected me to help them become better speakers, more persuasive communicators, more commanding presences. Instead, I suggested something radical, a listening tour for 2 weeks. I asked each manager to spend 1 hour daily doing nothing but listening to their workers, not problem solving, not defending company policies, not offering solutions, just listening. The managers thought I had lost my mind. The workers were suspicious. But what happened next became a case study I would reference for the rest of my career. Within days, problems that had been festering for months began surfacing. Workers revealed that the primary production bottleneck wasn't equipment failure, was a scheduling system that forced them to wait for materials. They explained that the real cause of quality issues wasn't carelessness, it was unrealistic time pressures that forced them to rush through critical steps. Most importantly, they shared solutions, not complaints, but actual, workable solutions that they had been thinking about for months, but had never been asked to contribute. The transformation was remarkable. Productivity increased by 30% within 6 weeks. The unionization talks ceased. Worker satisfaction surveys showed the highest scores in the company's history. None of this happened because the managers became better speakers. It happened because they became better listeners. This experience taught me that leadership isn't about having all the answers. It's about knowing how to find them, the best. Leaders understand that the people closest to the work often know more about the real problems and practical solutions than anyone in the executive suite. But listening as a leader requires a special kind of courage. It means admitting that you don't know everything. It means being willing to hear criticism of your decisions. It means creating an environment where people feel safe telling you things you might not want to hear. I learned to conduct what I called truth-gathering sessions. I would sit with small groups of employees and ask 3 simple questions. What's working well? What's not working? And what would you do differently? Then I would listen without defending, explaining, or problems, just listening. These sessions revealed insights that no amount of reports or meetings had uncovered. Employees shared creative ideas that saved thousands of dollars. They identified inefficiencies that had gone unnoticed by management. They offered perspectives that led to breakthrough innovations. The key was making it clear that listening didn't mean promising to implement every suggestion. I learned to say, I want to understand your perspective, and I can't promise to agree with every recommendation, but I can promise that your insights will influence my thinking. This approach built trust while maintaining authority. Employees felt heard and valued without expecting me to abdicate. Leadership responsibility. The most successful leaders I studied all shared this trait. They listened their way to better decisions. They understood that leadership isn't about imposing your vision on others, it's about gathering the best insights from everyone and synthesizing them into a direction that people want to follow. When you listen as a leader, you don't just gather Information you demonstrate that you value the people you lead, and people will follow someone who values them much more readily than someone who simply commands them. Asterisk, asterisk, nothing demonstrates that you were truly listening like remembering what someone told you weeks or months later. But I learned this lesson the hard way, through a moment of profound embarrassment that taught me the difference between hearing and remembering. I was at a business luncheon, feeling quite proud of my growing reputation as someone who really listens to people. A gentleman approached me and began talking about how much my advice had helped him with his presentation skills. He referenced a specific conversation we'd had about overcoming stage fright, mentioned how he'd applied my suggestions, and thanked me for remembering his fear of public speaking. The problem was, I had absolutely no memory of this conversation. None. I nodded and smiled, but inside I was mortified. This man had been so impacted by our interaction that he sought me out to express gratitude, and I couldn't even remember his name, let alone our conversation. That night, I realized I had been collecting conversations like a sieve collects water. I was present in the moment, asking good questions, showing genuine interest, but then I was letting those precious insights and connections drain away the moment the conversation ended. Developed what I called my connection card system. Simple but powerful method for capturing and recalling the important details about everyone I met. Within a week of meeting someone, I would create a small index card with their name, basic information, and 3 specific details from our conversation. But here's what made the system powerful. I didn't just record facts. I recorded the emotions, the dreams, the challenges they had shared. Instead of writing has 2 children, I would write worried about eldest daughters, struggle with mathematics, wants to help but doesn't know how. Instead of works in accounting, I would note, loves the detective work aspect of finding discrepancies but frustrated by repetitive tasks. The transformation was immediate and dramatic. When I ran into someone weeks later and said, "How did things work out with helping your daughter with her math studies?" their faces would light up with surprise and appreciation. I wasn't just someone who had listened in the moment, I was someone who had cared enough to remember and follow up. This system revealed something profound about human nature. People desperately want to be remembered, not just their names or their titles, but their stories, their struggles, their hopes. When you demonstrate that their words made enough of an impact on you to remember and reference later, you communicate that they matter. I began weaving remembered details back into future conversations in natural ways. If someone had mentioned struggling with a difficult client, I would ask about that situation the next time we met. If they had shared excitement about a family vacation, I would inquire about how it went. These weren't manipulation tactics. They were genuine expressions of continued interest in their lives. The emotional impact was extraordinary. Business relationships deepened into friendships. Casual acquaintances became trusted advisors. Professional contacts became personal advocates, all because I had shown that our previous conversations were valuable enough to remember and important enough to revisit. The system taught me that listening is only the first half of the equation. The second half is retention and recall. When you remember what people tell you, you're telling them that their words had value, that their experiences mattered, that they made an impression on you. True listening isn't just about being present in the conversation, it's about letting that conversation change you enough that you carry pieces of it forward. When you remember someone's story, you honor both the story and the storyteller. Memory, I learned, is the ultimate compliment you can pay to someone's trust in sharing their life with you. The ultimate test of listening skills isn't hearing someone you agree with. It's truly listening to someone whose views fundamentally oppose your own. I learned this during one of the most challenging conversations of my career, a debate that nearly destroyed an important relationship, but ultimately taught me the most valuable lesson about finding common ground. was serving on the board of a local charity alongside a man named William Patterson, whose political views were diametrically opposed to mine. We disagreed about everything: economic policy, social programs, even the best way to run the charity itself. Our board meetings had become tense affairs, where we would argue past each other, each trying to prove the other wrong, rather than seeking any kind of understanding. The breaking point came during a heated discussion about how to allocate our limited funds. William wanted to focus on immediate relief for families in crisis. I believed we should invest in educational programs that would help people become self-sufficient. The argument became personal, with both of us questioning not just each other's ideas but each other's values and motivations. After that meeting, I almost resigned from the board. But something nagged at me. In all our arguments, I realized I had never actually tried to understand why William held his views so passionately. I had been so busy proving him wrong that I had never asked him to help me understand what made him right. I called William and asked if we could meet for coffee, not to debate, but for me to understand his perspective. I explained that I wanted to learn how he had developed his approach to helping people, what experiences had shaped his views, what he saw that I might be missing, what happened next transformed my understanding of disagreement itself. William told me about growing up during the Depression, watching his father lose job after job, while his mother struggled to feed 4 children. He described the shame his family felt when they had to accept charity, and how the organizations that helped them immediately, without questions or conditions, literally kept them alive during their darkest months. Educational programs are wonderful, Dale, he said, but they don't help when a family hasn't eaten in 2 days. Sometimes people need a bridge to get them through the crisis before they can even think about long-term solutions. For the first time, I wasn't hearing William's position as opposition to min. I was hearing it as wisdom earned through painful experience. His approach wasn't wrong, it was addressing a different part of the same problem I cared about. I shared my own story, watching my father struggle not just with temporary setbacks, but with a lack of skills that left him vulnerable to every economic downturn. I explained how education had been my family's path out of uncertainty, how knowledge had provided security that charity alone never could. Something remarkable happened. Instead of arguing about which approach was better, we began exploring how both approaches could work together. Immediate relief and long-term development weren't competing strategies, they were complementary phases of comprehensive help. The technique I developed from this experience became one of my most powerful tools: listening for the wisdom behind the disagreement. When someone holds a strong position that opposes yours, they usually have good reasons. Those reasons often contain insights that can strengthen your own understanding or reveal solutions neither of you had considered independently. I learned to ask, "Help me understand what led you to that conclusion," instead of "Here's why you're wrong." I discovered that most disagreements aren't really about the positions people hold, they're about the different experiences and values that led them to those positions. When you listen through disagreement, you often find that you and your opponent want the same ultimate outcome but have different ideas about how to achieve it. That common ground becomes the foundation for solutions that neither person could have developed alone. The biggest sale of my early career was closed with exactly 17 words from me, and over 2,000 words from my prospect. That experience revolutionized my understanding of what selling really means, and taught me that the best salespeople are actually the best listeners. I was trying to secure a contract to teach public speaking classes to the employees of a large insurance company. The president, Mr. Franklin Roberts, had agreed to meet with me, but I could tell within the first few minutes that he was skeptical about the value of communication training. Every instinct told me to launch into my prepared presentation about the benefits of public speaking skills, the success stories from other companies, the detailed curriculum I had developed. Instead, I did something that felt terrifyingly risky. I asked him a question and then kept my mouth shut. "Mr. Roberts," I said, "what challenges are you seeing with communication in your organization?" For the next 45 minutes, I barely spoke. I asked follow-up questions. I nodded. I took notes. But mostly I listened as this successful businessman painted a picture of his real problems and concerns. He told me about salespeople who couldn't explain complex policies clearly to customers. He described managers who struggled to motivate their teams during difficult periods. He shared his frustration with presentations that bored rather than inspired his board of directors. He even admitted his own nervousness about an upcoming speech to the industry association. Most importantly, he began selling himself on the solution. "You know, Dale," he said at one point, "if we could just help our people communicate with more confidence and clarity, I think we could increase our sales by at least 20%. When he finished describing his challenges, I said exactly 17 words. "It sounds like communication training could address several of these issues. Would you like me to design a program?" He signed the contract that afternoon. That experience taught me that selling isn't about convincing people to buy what you're offering. It's about discovering what they really need and then showing them how you can provide it. But you can't discover their real needs by talking about your product. You can only discover them by listening to their problems. I began studying the most successful salespeople I knew, and I discovered a pattern. They all spent far more time asking questions and listening than presenting and pitching. They understood that customers don't buy products, they buy solutions to their problems. And you can't solve problems you haven't taken the time to understand. The traditional approach to selling is backwards. Most salespeople spend their time talking about features and benefits, trying to convince prospects that they need what's being offered. But effective selling starts with listening to understand what the prospect actually needs, then showing how your offering addresses those specific needs. I developed what I called the listening sale approach. First, ask diagnostic questions to understand their current situation and challenges. Don't ask leading questions designed to point toward your solution. Ask genuine questions to understand their reality. Second, listen for both the stated problems and the emotional impact of those problems. When someone says our meetings run too long, they might really be saying, "I feel like I'm losing control of my team and my time." Third, reflect back what you've heard to confirm your understanding and show that you've been paying attention. So if I understand correctly, you're dealing with this builds trust and often prompts them to share additional details. Fourth, ask about the consequences of not solving these problems. What happens if these communication issues continue? This helps them articulate the cost of inaction. Finally, present your solution in terms of their specific problems and language. Instead of generic benefits, show exactly how your offering addresses the particular challenges they've described. The most powerful moment in any sales conversation is when the prospect says, "That's exactly what we need." But they can only say that if you've listened carefully enough to understand what they actually need, not what you think they should want. Listening in sales isn't just about gathering information. It's about building trust and demonstrating that you care more about solving their problems than making your sale. Asterisk. The most valuable conversations of my life happened in moments when people felt safe enough to tell me the truth, not the polite version. Not the socially acceptable version, but the real, unvarnished truth about what they were thinking and feeling. I learned this lesson from an unexpected source, my barber, Antonio, who had emigrated from Italy and built a small but loyal clientele. In New York, every 2 weeks, I would sit in his chair, and slowly, over months of careful listening, he began sharing stories that revealed the real challenges facing immigrants in America. But it wasn't just that Antonio was sharing his stories. It was how he created an environment where his customers felt safe to share theirs. His barbershop became a confessional of sorts, where men would open up about business failures, family troubles, and personal fears they wouldn't discuss anywhere else. I studied what Antonio did differently. He never offered unsolicited advice. He never judged anyone's choices or criticized their decisions. He asked gentle questions, but never pried. Most importantly, nothing shared in his chair ever became neighborhood gossip. People trusted him because he had proven he was trustworthy. I decided to become that kind of listener in my own life and work. Creating a safe space for truth requires more than just good intentions, requires specific behaviors that demonstrate you can be trusted with someone's vulnerability. I developed what I called the trust protocol. First, I eliminated judgment from my responses. When someone shared a mistake or failure, I resisted the urge to critique their choices or offer immediate solutions. Instead, I would acknowledge their experience. That must have been difficult, or I can understand why you felt that way. Second, I practiced what I called emotional matching. If someone was sharing something painful, I didn't try to cheer them up or minimize their feelings. If they were excited about something, I didn't dampen their enthusiasm with practical concerns. I learned to meet people where they were emotionally. Third, I protected confidences religiously. Nothing someone shared with me in private ever became a story I told elsewhere, even if they hadn't explicitly asked me to keep it confidential. This reputation for discretion preceded me and encouraged others to be more open. Fourth, I learned to tolerate uncomfortable silences. When someone was struggling to find words for something difficult, I didn't rush to fill the silence with my own words. I gave them space to gather courage and find their truth. The breakthrough came when a prominent businessman sought me out after a speaking engagement. He had heard about my reputation as someone who really listens, and he needed to talk through a crisis that was threatening both his business and his family. For 2 hours, this successful man shared fears, doubts, and mistakes he had never spoken aloud. He told me about financial decisions that haunted him, about the gap between his public success and private struggles, about his terror that he was failing the people who depended on him. I said very little during that conversation, but my presence, judgment-free, patient, completely focused, gave him permission to voice thoughts that had been consuming him in silence. By the end of our talk, he had worked through his own solution, not because I had given him advice, but because he had finally had a safe place to think out loud. Creating safe spaces for truth isn't about being a professional counselor, about being someone people can trust with their real selves. When you become that person, you don't just hear people's words, you become witness to their humanity. And in a world where most people are performing versions of themselves rather than revealing themselves, being truly seen and heard is one of the deepest gifts you can offer another human being. Asterisk, asterisk, my mother's handkerchief sits in my desk drawer, yellowed with age but still carrying the faint scent of her lavender perfume. It reminds me daily of the most important lesson she ever taught me, the difference between thinking about someone's pain and feeling it with them. I was 12 years old when our neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, lost her husband in a farming accident. The whole community rallied to help with practical matters, bringing food, helping with chores, offering financial support. But I watched my mother do something different. She sat with Mrs. Henderson and cried with her. "Why are you crying, Mama?" I asked later. Mr. Henderson wasn't related to us. My mother pulled out her handkerchief and wiped her eyes. Sometimes, Dale, the most important thing you can do is feel what someone else is feeling. That's how they know they're not alone. It took me years to understand what she meant. There's a profound difference between sympathy and empathy, between observing someone's emotions and experiencing them alongside them. Sympathy says, "I'm sorry for your pain." Empathy says, "I feel your pain with you." The distinction became clear during my work with a young woman named Catherine, who was struggling with severe stage fright in my public speaking classes. Every traditional approach had failed: breathing exercises, visualization techniques, gradual exposure. She would become so overwhelmed that she would leave class in tears. Instead of trying to fix her fear, I decided to understand it. I asked Catherine to help me feel what she felt when she stood in front of the group, not to describe it intellectually, but to help me experience it with her. She described the sensation of her heart racing so fast she thought it might stop, the feeling that everyone in the room could see through her, could tell she was a fraud who had no business speaking publicly, the overwhelming certainty that she would humiliate herself and prove everyone's worst assumptions about her as she talked. Something remarkable happened. I stopped thinking about her fear as a problem to solve and started feeling it as an experience we were sharing. My own heart rate increased. I felt the weight of imagined judgment. I understood viscerally why she couldn't just relax and be herself. That shift changed everything. Instead of offering techniques to overcome her fear, I acknowledged the reality and validity of what she was experiencing. "Catherine," I said, "what you're feeling makes complete sense. Standing in front of people and making yourself vulnerable is genuinely frightening. Your fear isn't a weakness, it's evidence that you care deeply about doing well." For the first time, someone wasn't trying to talk her out of her feelings or minimize them. Someone was validating them as reasonable responses to a genuinely challenging situation. That validation became the foundation for her eventual success. Because she no longer had to fight her fear and speak at the same time, she could acknowledge her fear and speak anyway. I learned that empathetic listening requires a kind of emotional courage. You have to be willing to feel uncomfortable emotions alongside someone else. You have to resist the urge to immediately comfort or fix, and instead be present with whatever they're experiencing. The empathy bridge isn't built with words, it's built with shared feeling. When someone knows you're not just hearing their story but feeling their experience, they stop being alone in their struggle. And people who don't feel alone can find strength they never knew they had. Empathy transforms listening from an intellectual exercise into an emotional connection. It's the difference between understanding someone's situation and understanding them. ***, my original telephone. A heavy black device that required full attention to operate. Sits on my bookshelf as a reminder of a simpler time when communication demanded presence. When that phone rang, you stopped everything else to answer it. There were no competing screens, no notifications, no ability to multitask your way through conversations. I lived in an age when listening was easier because distraction was harder. Today's world presents challenges to focused attention that I could never have imagined, making the skill of genuine listening both more difficult and more valuable than ever before. During my later years, I watched technology transform human interaction in ways that both amazed and concerned me. I saw the incredible power of instant connection across vast distances, but I also witnessed the devastating impact of divided attention on the quality of human relationships. I observed business meetings where people pretended to listen while secretly checking messages on small devices. I watched families sitting together at dinner tables, each person absorbed in their own electronic world. I saw the rise of what I came to call performative listening people, who looked like they were paying attention while their minds were completely elsewhere. The challenge isn't the technology itself, it's the false belief that we can effectively multitask our attention. The human brain, I learned from emerging research, cannot truly focus on multiple complex tasks simultaneously. When we try to listen while checking emails or planning our next meeting, we're not doing both things well, we're doing both things poorly. I developed what I called listening rituals to combat the pull of distraction. The phone ritual. When someone wanted to have an important conversation, I would physically remove any device that could interrupt us from my immediate environment. The act of putting the phone in another room sent a clear message. This conversation and this person deserve my complete attention. The eye contact commitment. I made a personal rule that if someone was speaking to me about something that mattered to them, I would maintain eye contact for the majority of our interaction. This wasn't just politeness. It was a way of anchoring my attention to the person in front of me. The repeat back practice. At key moments in important conversations, I would reflect back what I had heard. So what you're telling me is ... This practice served two purposes. It confirmed my understanding, and it forced me to truly process what they had said, rather than just waiting for my turn to speak. The most profound lesson I learned about listening in the modern world is that attention has become the ultimate luxury. In a society where everyone is constantly competing for mental bandwidth, the person who gives someone their complete, undivided attention stands out like a beacon. I watched business deals close, friendships deepen, and family relationships transform simply because someone made the radical choice to be completely present during conversations. The competitive advantage of focused listening became more pronounced as it became more rare. The technology that threatens listening also creates opportunities for those wise enough to use it intentionally. The same devices that can distract us from conversations can also be tools for deeper connection when used thoughtfully. But this requires conscious choice and disciplined practice. The principles of listening that I discovered decades ago remain unchanged. Genuine interest in others, patient attention to their words and feelings, and the wisdom to speak less so others can share more. What has changed is the level of intent required to create the conditions where real listening can happen. In a world of endless distractions, choosing to listen becomes an act of rebellion, a gift of presence that transforms both the giver and the receiver. The letters began arriving in the 1950s and never stopped. Hundreds of them, from people whose lives had been changed, not by anything brilliant I had said, but by how carefully I had listened to what they needed to say. These letters, now carefully preserved in a wooden box, represent the most meaningful, the legacy of my career, the profound impact of making people feel truly heard. One letter that particularly moved me came from a woman named Eleanor, whom I had met briefly at a conference in Chicago. She wrote to tell me that our 20-minute conversation had saved her marriage, not because I had given her relationship advice, but because, for the first time in months, someone had listened to her describe her feelings without trying to fix them or judge them. That experience of being heard had given her the courage to have an honest conversation with her husband about what their relationship really needed. Another letter came from a businessman who credited a single conversation with me for the success of his company. During a chance encounter at a hotel, I had simply asked him about his business challenges and then listened as he worked through his own solutions out loud. He later wrote that talking through his problems with someone who was genuinely interested but not emotionally invested had helped him see possibilities he had been missing. These letters taught me something profound about the ripple effects of listening. When you truly hear someone, you don't just impact that moment or that conversation, you often change how they see themselves and their possibilities. People who feel heard become more willing to share their ideas, more confident in their insights, more open to forming deeper connections with others. I began to understand that listening creates what I came to call the legacy effect. The person you listen to today will often become a better listener themselves, passing on the gift of attention to others in their life. A parent who feels heard is more likely to truly listen to their children. A manager who experiences genuine listening becomes more likely to create space for their team members to be heard. The multiplication effect is extraordinary. One meaningful listening experience can influence dozens of relationships, as the recipient carries forward both the memory of being heard and the model of how to hear others. I watched this pattern repeat throughout my career. Students who felt genuinely heard in my classes became teachers who created space for their own students to be heard. Business leaders who experienced the power of being listened to became leaders who built their success on understanding rather than commanding. The listening legacy isn't just about the individual conversations, it's about changing the culture of human interaction, one relationship at a time. Every time someone chooses to listen more than they speak, they're modeling a different way of connecting that influences everyone around them. But perhaps the most important aspect of the listening legacy is how it transforms the listener themselves. The more I practiced genuine listening, the more I learned about human nature, about the common struggles that unite us all, about the wisdom that exists in every person regardless of their background or education. Listening taught me humility. It showed me that intelligence isn't about having all the answers. It's about asking the right questions and being open to learning from anyone. It revealed that influence isn't about the power of your voice, about the quality of your attention. The letters in my wooden box represent more than professional success. They represent lives, touched by the simple but profound act of being truly heard. They remind me that in a world full of noise, the person who listens creates space for others to find their own voice. That may be the greatest legacy anyone can leave, not the echo of their own words, but the encouragement they gave others to speak their truth. **** My advanced communication workshop notes, filled with refinements developed through decades of teaching and practice, reveal the sophisticated listening techniques that separate good listeners from masterful ones. These weren't skills I developed overnight. They emerged from years of studying human communication at its highest levels. The first advanced technique I mastered was pattern listening, the ability to hear themes and connections across multiple conversations with the same person or group. Instead of treating each conversation as an isolated event, I learned to listen for recurring concerns, evolving perspectives, and underlying motivations that revealed themselves over time. I discovered this accidentally while working with a corporate executive who kept scheduling meetings to discuss different business challenges. After our fourth conversation, I realized he wasn't really seeking advice about marketing, strategies, or personnel decisions. He was working through his anxiety about an upcoming leadership transition. Every seemingly separate issue was actually connected to his deeper fear of not being ready for increased responsibility. When I reflected this pattern back to him, it seems like these various challenges all relate to your concerns about the promotion. He was stunned. No one had ever listened across conversations to hear the thread connecting his scattered worries. That insight allowed us to address his real concern rather than continuing to treat symptoms. The second advanced technique was strategic silence. In negotiations and difficult conversations, I learned that silence isn't just the absence of speech, a powerful tool for encouraging deeper truth and better solutions. During a particularly challenging contract negotiation, both sides had reached an impasse. Instead of adding more arguments or counter-offers, I simply sat quietly for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 30 seconds. The silence became uncomfortable enough that the other party began revealing their real constraints and concerns. Information that led to a breakthrough solution neither side had previously considered. Strategic silence works because most people are uncomfortable with conversational gaps and will fill them with increasingly honest information. But this technique requires tremendous discipline. Resisting the urge to speak when silence would be more powerful. The third technique was opportunity listening, training myself to hear potential in every interaction, even casual conversations. I learned that some of the most valuable business insights and relationship-building moments come from paying attention to throwaway comments and seemingly insignificant details. A casual mention of a client's frustration with their current supplier led to my largest consulting contract. An offhand comment about someone's hobby revealed a shared interest that became the foundation for a lifelong friendship. A brief reference to a family challenge opened the door to providing support that deepened a professional relationship into a personal one. This required developing what I called peripheral awareness, listening not just to the main topic of conversation, but to the context, emotions, and implications surrounding it. When someone mentions they're crazy busy, they might be sharing an opportunity to help, or a warning about their availability. When they reference a family celebration, they might be opening the door for personal connection. The fourth advanced technique was layered questioning, using sequences of questions to help people discover insights they didn't know they possessed. This went beyond simple follow-up questions to carefully constructed inquiries that guided people through their own thinking process. Instead of asking, "What's your biggest challenge?" I learned to ask, "What's working well right now?" followed by "What would you like to see working even better?" And then, "What do you think is preventing that improvement?" This sequence helped people move from surface-level complaints to deeper understanding of root causes and potential solutions. The mastery of advanced listening isn't about manipulating conversations, it's about creating conditions where deeper truth, better solutions, and stronger connections can emerge naturally. These techniques require practice, patience, and genuine interest in helping others think more clearly and feel more understood. The most advanced listeners become catalysts for other people's insights, facilitators of their own problem-solving, and architects of relationships built on mutual understanding and respect. Asterisk, my personal development chart, worn from years of tracking my own progress, reminds me that becoming a masterful listener isn't an accident, it's the result of deliberate practice and measurable improvement. The transformation from someone who talks too much to someone others seek out for important conversations requires a systematic approach and unwavering commitment. I developed what I called the 30-day listening challenge after watching too many people attend my seminars, feel inspired to change, and then slip back into old habits within weeks. Real transformation requires structure, accountability, and a clear path forward. Week 1, the foundation phase. Your first week focuses on awareness without judgment. Simply notice your current listening habits without trying to change them yet. Keep a small notebook and make a mark every time you interrupt someone, every time you catch your mind planning your response while they're talking, and every time you ask a question. That's really just a setup for your own story. Most people are shocked by how often they engage in these behaviors. One executive I worked with discovered he was interrupting an average of 12 times per day. A teacher realized she was asking listening questions that were actually disguised lectures. Awareness is the prerequisite for change. Week 2, the silence discipline. Implement the 3-second rule religiously. Every time someone finishes speaking, count silently before responding. 1, 2, This simple practice will immediately improve your listening and often reveal that people have more to say than their initial response. Suggested, practice strategic silence by asking fewer questions and making fewer comments. When someone shares something important, resist the urge to immediately respond with advice, similar experiences, or solutions. Instead, give them space to continue thinking out loud. Week 3, the question revolution. Transform your questioning habits by replacing closed-ended questions with open-ended ones. Instead of, "Did you like the presentation?" ask, "What stood out to you about the presentation?" Replace, "Are you worried about the deadline?" with, "How are you feeling about the timeline?" Master the 3 power phrases. Tell me more about that. What was that like for you? And help me understand, ... These phrases will unlock deeper conversations and demonstrate genuine interest in others' experiences and perspectives. Week 4, the integration challenge. Combine all your new skills while adding emotional listening. Start paying attention, not Just two words, but two feelings, energy levels, and unspoken concerns. Practice reflecting back both content and emotion. It sounds like you're excited about the opportunity, but also nervous about the timeline. Create listening rituals for important conversations. Put away devices, maintain eye contact, and give your complete attention. Most people will notice and appreciate this focused presence immediately. Measuring your progress. Track 3 specific metrics. How often do you interrupt? How frequently do people continue sharing after you think they're finished? How many times per week do people specifically seek you out for advice or important conversations? The most reliable indicator of listening improvement is when people begin treating you differently. They'll start sharing more personal information, asking for your input on important decisions, and expressing gratitude for feeling heard and understood. Common obstacles and solutions. The biggest challenge most people face is the discomfort of silence and the urge to fill conversational gaps with their own words. Practice tolerating awkward pauses. They often precede the most meaningful parts of conversations. Another obstacle is the fear that you're not contributing enough to conversations. Remember that helping someone think through their own ideas is often more valuable than sharing your opinions. Finally, resist the temptation to use listening skills as manipulation tools. Genuine listening requires authentic interest in others, not strategic behavior designed to get what you want. Your accountability system. Share your listening goals with someone who can observe your progress and provide honest feedback. Ask a trusted colleague, family member, or friend to point out when you fall back into old patterns. Review your progress weekly, celebrating improvements and identifying areas that still need work. Remember that becoming a masterful listener is a lifelong journey, not a destination you reach and then maintain effortlessly. The transformation from talking too much to listening too little rarely happens overnight. But with consistent practice and genuine commitment, you can become the kind of person others trust with their most important thoughts and feelings. Asterisk, asterisk, my final teaching notes, written in the last years of my active career, contained the wisdom I most wanted to pass on about the transformative power of choosing to listen more than you speak. These pages represent a lifetime of learning about human connection, influence, and the profound impact one person can have simply by giving others the gift of being truly heard. The decision to listen more than you speak isn't just a communication technique, it's a life philosophy that shapes every relationship you'll ever have. When you become someone who truly listens, you don't just change how others see you, you change how you see the world itself. I've watched listening transform marriages on the brink of divorce, when partners finally heard each other's real concerns, rather than just defending their own positions. I've seen business partnerships flourish when collaborators started focusing on understanding each other's perspectives, rather than proving their own points. I've witnessed friendships deepen into lifelong bonds when people felt safe enough to share their authentic selves, rather than performing socially acceptable versions. The competitive advantage of being an exceptional listener extends far beyond personal relationships. In every field I've studied, business, education, healthcare, leadership, the most successful individuals are those who have mastered the art of understanding others. They build stronger teams because they know what motivates each person. They negotiate better deals because they understand what the other party really needs. They inspire greater loyalty because people feel valued and understood in their presence. But, perhaps most importantly, listening transforms the listener. Every conversation becomes an opportunity to learn something new about human nature, about different perspectives, about creative solutions to common problems. The person who listens well becomes wiser, not through their own experiences alone, but through the accumulated wisdom of everyone they've taken the time to truly hear. I've learned that the world is full of extraordinary people living ordinary lives, carrying remarkable stories, insights, and wisdom that rarely get shared because few people take the time to listen for them. The elderly man at the coffee shop might be a war veteran with stories that would change your understanding of courage. The quiet colleague might have insights about efficiency that could revolutionize your work. The teenager who seems disinterested might be processing ideas that could shape the future. Your opportunity starting today is to become the person others seek out when they need to think through important decisions, work through difficult challenges, or simply feel understood. During difficult times, this isn't about becoming a professional counselor. It's about becoming someone whose presence creates space for others to discover their own wisdom and strength. The listening legacy you leave won't be measured in the brilliant things you said, but in the brilliant things you helped others discover about themselves. It won't be counted in the problems you solved, but in the problems you helped others solve for themselves. It won't be remembered for the advice you gave, but for the understanding you provided that allowed others to find their own answers. In a world that grows noisier every day, filled with people fighting to be heard, you have the opportunity to stand apart by choosing to hear. While others compete for attention, you can create attention. While others demand to be understood, you can focus on understanding. The person who listens well becomes a sanctuary in a chaotic world, a safe harbor for authentic human connection, a catalyst for other people's growth and self-discovery. This is your invitation to join the ranks of those who have discovered that the most powerful voice is often the one that chooses silence, that the greatest influence comes from helping others find their own voice, and that the most meaningful legacy is measured not in words spoken, but in lives touched by the gift of being truly heard. The world needs more listeners. Will you be one of them?